Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring some hand-picked excerpts from Dr. Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. I have to admit, I was surprised by how much this book resonated with me.
hmm
It's not just, self-help fluff. It really gets you thinking.
Yeah, Peterson is really good at connecting those dots between things that seem completely unrelated. You've got ancient myths and modern psychology, a little bit of biology, and even some religious philosophy. It's a pretty unique blend.
It is. And one of the things that struck me right away
hmm
was Peterson's take on human struggle. He uses this example of his friend Chris,
Yeah.
who really struggled with anger and substance abuse, dropping out of school. It just felt very real and relatable.
Yeah, and what's important here is that Peterson doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He argues that suffering is like a fundamental part of the human experience. We're all vulnerable, we all have limitations, and that inevitably leads to
And
pain.
it's not all doom and gloom.
Right.
He actually suggests that by confronting those limitations,
Yeah.
rather than trying to avoid them,
Yeah.
we can discover real meaning in life.
Exactly. It's like he's saying instead of running away from the things that scare us or make us uncomfortable,
Yeah.
we should lean into them, learn from them, and grow from them.
That actually leads perfectly into another interesting idea, dominance hierarchies. Now, this is where Peterson might lose some people, because he starts talking about lobsters.
Lobsters. I know, it sounds strange, but stick with me for a second. Peterson points out that lobsters who lose fights actually undergo physical changes in their brains that make them more submissive.
So he's suggesting that even though we, don't have claws and shells, our human brains might be wired to respond to wins and losses in a similar way. That a big promotion or public embarrassment
Mm-hmm.
could actually be messing with our brain chemistry.
That's the idea. It's this fascinating blend of evolutionary biology and psychology. Peterson's arguing that we're not as far removed from the animal kingdom as we like to think, and these primal instincts still influence our behavior, whether we're aware of them or not.
Okay, so we might be a little bit lobster-like
Yeah.
when it comes to competition and status. But Peterson also talks a lot about the importance of honesty, and that really hit home for me.
Yeah, he shares the story about a patient of his who was extremely paranoid and didn't trust anyone. But this patient actually trusted Peterson because he was always honest with him, even when they disagreed.
That's so powerful. It reminds me of that saying, the truth will set you free. But in this case, it's more like, ooh, the truth will build trust, even when it's hard.
Exactly. Peterson argues that building a life on lies, even small ones, ultimately distorts our reality and can lead to a whole lot of unnecessary suffering.
He uses this example of a woman in a failing marriage who just avoids difficult conversations with her husband, letting resentment fester. It's like she's sweeping problems under the rug, but eventually there's no more room, and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down.
Yeah, he's saying that honesty, even when it's painful, is the foundation of a meaningful life. It takes courage to be truthful, especially when we're afraid of the consequences. But that leads us to another question. How do we develop that kind of courage? How do we face those difficult truths head on without crumbling?
And that brings us to Peterson's emphasis on discipline and sacrifice. He uses all sorts of examples,
Yeah.
from the biblical story of Adam and Eve
Oh,
to
yeah.
his own experiences raising a stubborn toddler, to illustrate the importance of delaying gratification and making tough choices for long-term gain.
Now, this might sound like typical self-help advice, but Peterson digs a little deeper. He connects this idea of sacrifice to our evolution as human beings. He argues that the ability to forego immediate pleasure for a greater purchase is what allowed us to build civilizations, create art, and achieve incredible things.
So he's not just talking about skipping dessert
True.
to fit into your genes. He's talking about building character,
Yeah.
developing resilience, forward building, and facing the shadow side of human nature head on, which is a pretty good segue into our next theme.
Absolutely. And this is where Peterson gets really real. He doesn't shy away from the darkness that exists within us and in the world. He talks about his experiences witnessing violence, his daughter's battle with a severe illness, things that have clearly shaped his worldview. And he argues that we can't just pretend these darker aspects of ourselves don't exist. We have to acknowledge them, understand them, and confront them if we ever want to overcome them.
He even uses this powerful phrase, confronting the shadow, which sounds pretty intense. But I think what he's getting at is that we all have this capacity for both good and evil inside us. And by ignoring the shadow parts of ourselves, we're actually giving them more power.
Yeah, it's like pretending the monster under the bed doesn't exist. You can try to ignore it, but it's still there, lurking in the darkness. Peterson is saying that we have to turn on the light, face our fears, and deal with them directly.
Okay, so we've got to confront our inner demons, embrace struggle, and always tell the truth. That's a lot to process. But Peterson doesn't stop there. He also has some strong opinions about ideology, which is where things get a little controversial.
Right. He's particularly critical of what he calls ideological possession, where people blindly follow a set of beliefs without questioning them or considering alternative perspectives. He sees this as a dangerous trap that can lead to fanaticism and even violence.
And he's not just talking about extreme political ideologies. He also sees this happening in some social movements where people are so focused on their own group identity that they lose sight of the bigger picture.
He worries that this kind of thinking can create an us versus them mentality, where people are quick to demonize anyone who disagrees with them. And that kind of polarization can make it really difficult to have productive conversations or find common ground.
So it's not that Peterson is against social justice or progress. He's just cautioning us to be mindful of the potential pitfalls of ideology and to always be willing to think critically and challenge our own assumptions.
Exactly. He's saying don't just accept something as true because someone tells you it is. Question everything, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions.
It's like he's encouraging us to be independent thinkers, not just followers. But that raises another question. If we're not supposed to blindly follow ideologies, then what should we base our lives on? Where do we find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless?
That's the big question, isn't it? And Peterson offers some pretty compelling answers. He talks a lot about the importance of personal responsibility, which might sound a bit old-fashioned, but it really resonates with me.
I get that. It's easy to feel like we're just cogs in a machine, especially in today's world. But Peterson's reminding us that we actually have a lot more agency than we might think.
He uses this powerful metaphor of writing the words we want inscribed on our souls. It's about consciously choosing the values we want to embody and living in accordance with them.
It's like creating our own personal code of ethics, something to guide our actions and decisions, even when things get tough. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even start?
Well, Peterson believes that true meaning isn't found in some grand abstract ideal. It's found in the everyday choices we make, the actions we take, and the way we treat ourselves and others.
So it's not about waiting for some big moment of inspiration or enlightenment. It's about taking small steps each day to align ourselves with our values.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of cleaning our rooms, keeping our promises, and striving for excellence in even the smallest tasks. It might sound mundane, but he argues that these seemingly insignificant actions can actually have a ripple effect on our lives and the world around us.
It's like that saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. If we can't even be bothered to take care of our own space or follow through on our commitments, how can we expect to achieve anything truly meaningful?
He even connects this to the idea of confronting chaos. He argues that by taking care of our own lives and surroundings, we're establishing a small pocket of order in a chaotic world.
And perhaps by doing so, we're contributing to a larger sense of order and meaning in the world. It's like we're each responsible for tending our own little garden. And by doing so, we're hoping to create a more beautiful and vibrant ecosystem.
And it's not just about external order. Peterson also emphasizes the importance of inner peace and self-acceptance. He talks about the need to confront our own flaws and limitations with compassion rather than judgment.
So it's not about striving for some unattainable ideal of perfection. It's about being honest with ourselves about who we are, accepting both our strengths and weaknesses, and working to improve in areas where we can be.
He even suggests that embracing our imperfections can actually be a source of strength and resilience. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, and that's okay.
It's a very humanizing perspective, and it reminds me of that quote from Leonard Cohen, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." But Peterson doesn't just focus on individual growth and self-improvement. He also has some interesting things to say about relationships and the role of love in our lives.
And this is where his ideas about responsibility and commitment really come into play. He argues that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day to show up for the people we care about, even when it's difficult.
It's about putting in the effort, making sacrifices, and being willing to work through challenges together.
He even suggests that the act of loving someone, truly loving someone, can be a form of self-transcendence. It's about putting the needs of another person above our own, even when it goes against our own selfish desires.
That's a pretty high bar to set for love. But I think what he's getting at is that true love, requires a certain level of maturity and selflessness. It's not just about butterflies and romantic gestures. It's about making a conscious commitment to support and nurture another person.
And that kind of love, the kind that's grounded in responsibility and sacrifice, can be incredibly transformative. It can help us grow as individuals, strengthen our relationships, and even make the world a better place.
Speaking of making the world a better place, Peterson doesn't shy away from discussing religion and spirituality, which is another area where he's known to stir things up.
Right. He sees deep wisdom in ancient religious traditions, particularly the Judeo-Christian tradition. He's not necessarily advocating for a literal interpretation of religious doctrines, but he's fascinated by the psychological and philosophical insights that these stories offer.
He uses the biblical story of Adam and Eve to illustrate his point about the importance of sacrifice and the awakening of consciousness.
He argues that the story of the fall isn't just about sin and punishment. It's about the human journey of confronting our own limitations, our mortality, and the need for work and sacrifice.
He sees echoes of this story in our own lives. We're all confronted with challenges, with suffering, with the knowledge of our own eventual death. And he suggests that it's through confronting these difficult truths, rather than trying to avoid them, that we find meaning and purpose.
He even compares this to Christ's sacrifice on the cross, arguing that it's the ultimate example of sacrificing oneself for the good of humanity.
Now, that's a pretty bold comparison.
Yeah.
But I think what he's getting at is that there's this profound truth embedded in these ancient stories, this idea that suffering and sacrifice can actually be redemptive.
He's not necessarily saying that we all have to be martyrs or saints, but he's suggesting that there's a certain nobility in choosing to suffer for something greater than ourselves, whether that's for our family, our community, or even for humanity as a whole.
It's a challenging concept, but it's also incredibly inspiring. It's a reminder that we're not just individuals. We're part of something much larger than ourselves.
And that by choosing to act in service to something greater, we can tap into a deeper source of meaning and purpose.
It's like we're transcending our own limited ego and connecting to a higher power, whether we call that God, the universe, or simply the collective human spirit.
And that connection can give us the strength to face even the most difficult challenges, to overcome our fears, and to live lives of courage, compassion, and purpose.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. And it's worth acknowledging that Peterson's views haven't exactly been met with universal praise. In fact, he's been called a lot of things, some not so flattering.
Right, he's a very polarizing figure, and his ideas have definitely sparked a lot of debate and controversy. Some accuse him of being sexist, transphobic, or even fascist, which are, very serious accusations.
Yeah, it can be tough to separate the person from their ideas, especially when those ideas are challenging or even offensive to some people.
It's important to remember that just because someone disagrees with Peterson, it doesn't necessarily mean they haven't thought critically about his work. There are legitimate concerns about the potential impact of some of his views, and it's crucial that we engage with those concerns thoughtfully and respectfully.
At the same time, we also have to be careful not to dismiss his ideas out of hand, simply because they're controversial or make us uncomfortable. Peterson himself encourages this kind of critical engagement, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He's not afraid of debate or disagreement. In fact, he seems to thrive on it. He sees it as a necessary part of the search for truth.
And that search, as we've seen, is at the heart of his work. He's not offering easy answers or trying to tell anyone what to think. He's inviting us to join him on a journey of exploration, a deep dive into the complexities of human experience, encouraging us to question everything, including our own assumptions.
Exactly. And that process of questioning, of challenging our own beliefs and biases, can be uncomfortable, even painful at times. But it's also incredibly rewarding. It's how we grow, how we learn, and how we ultimately become more fully realized human beings.
So after spending all this time with Peterson's ideas, what stands out to you the most? What do you think listeners can take away from this deep dive?
For me, it's this overarching theme of personal responsibility. Peterson is urging us to step up, to own our lives, and to strive to make a positive impact on the world, even in the face of adversity and uncertainty.
It's a call to action, but it's not about achieving some grand, unattainable goal. It's about focusing on the small things, the everyday choices and actions that shape who we are and what we contribute to the world.
He's reminding us that we have more agency than we often realize, and that even seemingly insignificant actions can have a ripple effect, creating positive change in our own lives and the lives of others.
It's about cleaning our rooms, yes, but it's also about speaking our truth, standing up for what we believe in, and
Mm.
treating ourselves and others
Mm.
with compassion and respect.
It's about confronting our fears, embracing our imperfections, and striving to become the best versions of ourselves, not for the sake of ego or accolades, but for the betterment of humanity as a whole.
He's offering a path forward, a way to find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming. It's a message of hope, a reminder that we have the power to create a better future, both for ourselves and for generations to come.
And that's a message that resonates deeply, especially in these uncertain times. It's a call to embrace our shared humanity, to find common ground despite our differences, and to work together to create a world that's more just, more compassionate, and more fulfilling for everyone.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
what's your final takeaway for our listeners? What's that one nugget of wisdom you hope they'll carry with them?
I think it's this. Remember that you have the power to choose, to act, and to make a difference. Don't underestimate the impact of your choices, no matter how small they may seem. Embrace the challenges, confront your fears, and strive to live a life that's aligned with your values. The world needs your unique gifts and contributions.
That's a powerful message to end on. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you about Peterson's ideas? Which excerpts resonated most strongly? Share your takeaways with us. Until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.